That seems fair to me.
Fairness isn't the
really
issue.
think
If
you're
anything,
Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make a judgment on what fair is.
Unacceptable by any reasonable standard. You can't.
Donnybrook is made possible through the generous support of the members of KETC.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. Good to have you aboard, and thanks to our friends at the Gatesworth for making this program possible, as you do week in and week out. Let's meet those assembled around the big table for this Thursday, starting with Sarah Fenske, Editor-in-Chief of the Riverfront Times, sitting in for Wendy, who's taking the night off. Here's Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Ray Hartmann from St. Louis Magazine, and from STLMag.com, the St. Louis American, and this past week, the New York Times, Mr. Alvin Reid. Wow, how about that, Alvin? You were in the courtroom this week when it was kind of a shocker, I thought. I mean, here we had a trial of the first governor in Missouri history to be indicted, and day 3 of the jury selection, the circuit attorney dropped all the charges. And you were in the courtroom covering this for the New York Times. Saw your byline this week. Very
14A.
impressive.
Yep, it's in there.
Hey, oh, good for you. So what do you think? Was this case dropped because the special master, Richard Callahan, former U.S. attorney, on Friday announced that there was no photograph either on the phone that Eric Greitens used on March 21st, 2015, and there was no photograph of any victim in the cloud or in the email, and so the circuit attorney finally realized late last week she had zero evidence.
The day began on Monday, bright and early, I guess a little bit after 9 o'clock, with the defense attorney saying, like, now when we left off Friday, there was the, you know, what Callahan had said, no photo, nothing found in the cloud. I don't know if they actually moved, this was like a formal thing, but they basically said, acknowledge, discovery closed, right? And everybody kind of signed off on discovery closed, i.e. this trial was going to go on without that photo and without that evidence. Now, what we didn't know at the time was that Greitens' attorneys were pushing for Kim Gardner to be listed as a witness for the defense. And I guess that was appealed, and the appeal was rejected, so thus she was going to be called as a witness if the trial continued, at which point when that became official, they threw in the towel and said they would like to appoint a special prosecutor. It was a long day that ended suddenly at about 5 o'clock on Monday, sent the courtroom into a frenzy. It was really old school.
Yeah, right.
But it was.
You think that's the reason? I doubt that, because John Ammon, the professor from St. Louis University, and others have said that she could have testified, and she could have appointed an assistant to take over the prosecution, because you reported that she didn't say any words in court anyway.
She did not. She did not say a word the entire Monday. But now part of that could have been that she knew she was going to be called as a witness, and if you're going to be called as a witness, anything you said or whatever. Now, it was just jury impanelment asking basically the same questions over and over and over again of different people. So right. I don't know.
You know, it seemed like just the latest in a string of embarrassments for Kim Gardner. I mean, I don't know why an elected prosecutor called as a witness wouldn't just say, okay, I'll be a witness. I got nothing to hide. I've got nothing to be ashamed about. One of my assistants will take my position. I'm not running this case anyway. And testify. I mean, this stuff where it suddenly dropped because Kim Gardner's a witness, I thought that was awful.
I think you had a good point. I, for months, have been defending her against people like yourself who were questioning one thing or another, and I've been saying, look, let the process play out. Let's see what happens. And I'm not usually right with predictions. I happen to think all along, including last week, that there wasn't going to be a conviction in this case. I think the most significant, and I don't have a theory, I think it's very possible it's over the photograph. Who knows what it is, or why she didn't, why they threw in the towel. I think the most significant thing that happened afterwards, though, was that the two ranking top leaders, the Republican leaders in the Missouri Senate, immediately put out a statement saying, we don't care about the stinking trial, we're going full speed ahead. And I thought, wow, they didn't even wait. Their reaction to this was to jump on how fast they were going to go after Greitens on the impeachment process. So to me, that's the most important thing going forward.
Well, maybe the most important thing politically, but for Greitens, I mean, the possibility of whether or not he's going to prison, that remains something that he's got to worry about. A felony it can hold you back in life. Let's just say that.
Well, let me ask you this, Sarah. The circuit attorney, Kim Gardner, says she's going to appoint a special prosecutor in 30 days. I mean, I think she has a 30-day limit to do that. Is she going to appoint a special prosecutor?
I think she's going to try. I think right now she's probably out there working the phones, trying to find somebody to take this case. And I wouldn't be shocked if she found somebody. As we've all talked about, this case is seriously flawed. However, you should never underestimate how ambitious some prosecutors are. And, you know, they love these public corruption cases. It's a great way to make your name if you can actually win. This would be a hard one to win, but...
Oh, absolutely. But let's say she was not being called as a witness forever, and this trial plowed on. It would have made a difference in Jefferson City, because I could have seen Friday afternoon where they're called into session to discuss the governor's future. At the same time, the young lady he was involved with is in St. Louis testifying, and she's crying, and Scott Rosenblum is grilling her, and they did just that whole scene would add to the fervor of this guy's got to go. Well, right now, there's a lot of people in Missouri who said, like, he never should have been charged, political witch hunt, on and on. I stand by my man, Governor Greitens. Now, we may disagree with them, but this does improve his chances of surviving this impeachment process.
Oh, I agree with that. And I actually think that there is a good chance he'll be a special prosecutor. I don't think it's be ruled out.
Really?
Yeah, and I, as I say, to me, I really think, even if he was convicted, he's not going to prison for this. But I think that while I don't think, based on everything I've heard and seen, whatever, that there's a likelihood that he would be convicted in this particular case, it's still, I don't think it's such that it's impossible. And one of the interesting things, if they get a special prosecutor, I hope they don't get somebody that they can call a liberal Democrat.
How about Al Watkins?
I hope they get somebody, because part of their defense theory is, well, go ahead.
I don't think they're going to find a prosecutor. The only reason they went forward is they had the statute of limitations for filing charges. And they thought, well, let's file the charges now. Maybe we'll get the evidence necessary, that is the photograph. Now, without that photograph, I can't imagine a lawyer saying that this case is prosecutable.
Well, but if I had the option, Alvin, we're going to appoint you the special prosecutor, I would take it if I had the option of reviewing all the evidence and saying, like, I can't make a case. Now, if he was charged, like you say, he's charged with a file, and then you are appointed special prosecutor, I might not take that. But if I had the option of saying this, we're not moving forward.
But the only person who's being investigated now in St. Louis, aside from the governor's donor fund charges, is William Donald Tisby, who is the investigator out of Alabama. Wouldn't it be weird if the guy who gets convicted is not the governor, but his investigator?
Well, that would call for the circuit attorney's office to indict the guy that they hired. I just don't see that happening either.
You know, why not?
Well, and she might be prosecuted too.
If the police are as petty as I am, they would probably want to investigate Tisby, because, you know, their feathers were ruffled in the beginning when Kim Gardner said the St. Louis police wouldn't take it because it was a public corruption case. And first of all, they thought, well, we're not Mayberry. We take a public corruption case. And secondly, it's not a public corruption case. It's an invasion of privacy. Right. So if I were the police, I'd be upset that Kim Gardner went outside and got Tisby, and I think I do want to investigate
well, they are
him.
Well, and you know, look, they invite him to their prayer breakfast. Like, they might want to do Greitens a favor here and pursue this case.
That's an interesting point. And you know, there's no question that they have, and the guy, from everything that's been reported, perjury is a very difficult thing to prove. So he's probably in the same vein. But back to your thing real quickly, the key for a special prosecutor, I think, is how much they believe her testimony. I mean, her testimony was going to make or break, as opposed to physical evidence.
That's true, but she was blindfolded. Okay. And that's not usually a good witness, generally speaking. But my point especially when Scott Rosenblum is...
I'll just stick that her testimony would be the key to that decision.
Well, let me ask you, Bill. There are winners and losers throughout, and maybe we can identify a few, but one of them seems to be Scott Fawn and the Missouri Times. Their press credentials apparently were yanked this week in Jefferson City by the governing board of journalists who oversee press credentials for State House journalists. Now, it was revealed this past week by Al Watkins, the attorney for the ex-husband, that when he got this $100,000, $50,000 from Scott Fawn, that it was from a political operative through Scott Fawn, and it was intended for the ex-husband and his children. So here we have a guy who is purporting to be a journalist or at least a publisher and who was actually part of the action secretly. Do you think that his credentials should have been yanked?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's very serious when you're giving money to a lawyer to give to a witness. I mean, if I was a defendant and I found out that some of my enemies were funding the witness, I'd be distraught. As far as Scott Fawn goes, the Missouri Times has always been this kind of hybrid newspaper, really for lobbyists and people with money who are watching the legislature. And I thought, okay, that's a quasi paper. I wouldn't take their credentials away.
I think they had to do it, the press corps. We were seeing this on Twitter and on social media where people were like, oh, it's the media that's trying to get Eric Greitens, and here is proof. The media is actually carrying around sacks of money trying to subsidize this, and it's so hard to explain to readers. We would never do that. The Post-Dispatch would never do that. That's not how journalism is supposed to function. But Scott has been sitting in this position of being able to talk on radio shows, on TV shows, to publish this newspaper, to sort of pose as a journalist, when really what he's doing is he's almost acting as a political operative, and somebody had to stop that charade, and I'm glad that your colleagues and some of the people down in the State House did.
You make a good point, and I'm just saying that everyone kind of knew that, well, not everyone, but the Missouri Times has widely been thought of as just a political operative thing.
First of
I mean,
all,
it was set up by Stephen Tilley, wasn't it?
I think
I hate to disagree with the editor of the Riverfront Times.
Oh, good.
However,
Thank you,
I
Ray.
will
Right.
in this particular case, because first of all, who among us has not brought a briefcase full of money? I mean, come on, Eddie, we all have done that. But no, I think that maybe Scott's publicly said, I'm not a journalist. If they wanted it in his particular case, I would argue that the Missouri Times, and I read it online, I don't read the newspaper, but online, I think the Missouri Times consistently has some of the best and actually balanced coverage of Jeff City, and the most substantive. If you want to actually look at what the bills are and what the discussion is about say, the Ameren UE thing or all this stuff, they have the best coverage, and are among the best coverage.
But isn't it also possible to say, Ray, like the Exxon annual report probably has some good information on oil, but it's not journalism.
No,
it's
but
funded by a special interest.
I happen to agree with Bill that I would not have pulled the credentials, and I do think it's journalism.
Really?
And I do not think, if they want to punish his conduct in this case and say, you, Scott Fawn, lose your credentials, that's one thing. I do not think they should have pulled Missouri Times. That's me.
I think he crossed the line, so just broad jumped it. You have to. You got to put him in time out at least for a year or two. But yeah, I vote with the Post-Dispatch. You guys out of here. Deal with it as you can.
Hey, Ray, let me ask you then. What do you think about money going to the ex-husband? Would that be a problem for you? In other words, Al Watkins, again, this gets kind of complicated, but Al Watkins, the attorney for the ex-husband, testified under oath, according to Greitens' defense team and lawyer Jim Martin, that he received this money, and it was intended to go to the ex-husband. The ex-husband wanted it and expected it. Does that change things?
It looks terrible, and I will say this. I am so giddy about the irony of Eric Greitens, of all people, being victimized, which he clearly was in this case, by dark money. I mean, this was clearly the use of dark money, and if you don't like that, you don't like irony, okay? I mean, Eric Dark Money Greitens, the king of dark money, is being victimized by this. I think it would depend, I mean, it looks terrible. I think it depends on whether you could show that there was some direct intent or some connection to, in some way, suborning perjury or meddling in the witnesses. And if you could show that, it's a big problem. I think just the fact that the money changed hands isn't in and of itself a crime or anything. So we'd have to see what the
Well, if you were
details
charged with something, Ray, that you thought, your argument was flimsy, and you found out that your enemies were paying a witness to testify against him.
Were they paying a witness? Were they paying the witness or paying the attorney?
Paying the husband expected some of that money himself. according to
I
Mr.
think
Martin.
if they-
According to
well-
Martin, and not only for himself, but for his kids. And that brings in witness number one, the illicit lover at the center, because if her kids are getting enriched, suddenly her testimony can
There's
change.
potentially a real problem with that. But I'm saying I don't know that that's just one person saying it, and I don't know that we know for sure what. We don't know anything about really what the source of the money was. There's a lot of theories that had to do with the tax credits. I mean, there's different theories.
Yeah, but
so
this
it
was not
depends
hearsay.
on.
I mean, this man was sworn when he said this. Now, not that people don't
Right,
lie
yeah, that's right.
under
I don't
oath,
know.
but
His role in this, it just makes such an already ugly situation so much uglier and more complicated. It's not just she said versus he said. You suddenly got this third party who's popping up saying, oh, I'm going to like give you this tape that I recorded of her. Oh, and it turns out I've got a motivation to do that I'm not disclosing. It really does muddy the water.
Well, and also, according to Jim Martin and the defense team, they found texts to the illicit lover from Stacey Newman, state representative, and said that the Missouri Democratic leadership will help you. Here's the personal cell phone number for Ms. Gardner. And it turns out the two did meet in an Illinois hotel alone. And we encourage you to go forward with this.
But there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, it makes it seem like the efforts are totally political.
Well, as I say, the interesting political calculus on this is the party that wants Eric Greitens out is the Republican Party. I mean, there's no debating that. I mean, I'm surprised as many Democrats are not sitting this out. If I were advising the Democratic Party, I'd say get out of the way. The Republican Party's having a civil war. Get your popcorn and enjoy the civil war and pipe down. Because the worst thing for the Democrats, whether they want to admit it or not, is for Eric Greitens to leave the building. You can call this ugly if you want. It's fun. It's a great story. It's the best story we've ever had in 30 years. And it's like,
But here's the
it's
thing.
fun for the Democrats.
Here's
the
the thing.
Democrats can't want Eric
Here's
Greitens to
the thing.
leave. Come
Here's
on.
the thing, though, and you may not see this, but if you're in outstate Missouri and you see the governor's been dragged through the mud for 4 months, and I'm not saying he's a choir boy, I'm not even saying that he's not guilty of some bad
There's
things.
a lot of people.
But then you find that the charges are dropped at the last minute. You might start to think of him as more of the victim as
A
opposed
lot
to
of
the
people do.
perpetrator.
He's got
that's what I was saying earlier.
30% of this state is solidly behind him. That's the
And
beauty
that could
of
go
it.
up.
It might. But the point is, at the end of the day, if you're the Republican Party, are you better off with Mike Parson, who is well-liked within the party? Are you better off with him? And certainly if your name is Eric Schmidt or Jay Ashcroft, are you better off down the road with Eric Greitens, in office or out of office? And the answer is they want him out. So you can argue a lot of things. The passion that the Republican Party has in the state legislature
I see it.
to get rid
I'm
of
not
him
denying
is
that.
very clear.
that's fine.
That's all I'm
it's so
saying.
cynical. I mean,
I plead guilty. I plead
I
guilty.
think that a
It's
lot
cynical.
of Democrats are just revolted
Well, thank
by
you.
the
I
allegations
too.
against him,
I
and that's
too.
what's
The
driving
man is
them.
reprehensible.
He is.
I don't want him to be the governor.
Well,
All right,
I
now,
didn't want him to be
I'm
governor
not
when he
talking for
ran.
myself. I'm just saying if I'm an elected Democrat down there in Jefferson City, yeah, there is some principle to the fact that the guy just,
He was like that before he ran.
Okay, let's move on. Alvin, I want to ask you about the Supreme Court ruling this week that allows states to establish sports betting. And you think this is going to be a good thing for St. Louis?
As the headline on my column in the St. Louis American reads this week, St. Louis should be the gambling mecca of the Midwest. We need to be all in starting yesterday when the Supreme Court made the decision. Listen, I see thoroughbred horse racing track, find that $750 million you're going to throw at this make-believe stadium, build something out there, make it a gambling palace. Every casino in the city should be trying to apply for a license right now, because why wait? Illinois is going to be all over it, because this is going to save Fairmount Park over there right across the river. Illinois is going to be all in because they're broker than we are. They're desperate. You watch and see. We're either going to be in the top 10 or the bottom 10. How about we be in the top 10? Not wait. This is a blessing. This is legalization of marijuana times 10. I'm telling you, this is all in.
I disagree. I see places like Atlantic City, and they have got a lot of gambling. They always have, and they're not really good communities. We already have the lottery. We already have how many boats now? 5 or so. Where they had great promises that they were going to, the streets would be lined in gold. And champagne would be flowing.
The lottery is not as much fun as sports.
No,
betting.
here's the deal. We cannot moralize because our state, just like Illinois, is in the gambling business. We are in the business. We're the house. The only thing I would say to you before you celebrate so much is there's one principle about gambling that holds true, period. The house wins.
Well,
Right.
That's what should be the
Right.
house.
That's right. That's
no,
right.
and the question is, in this case, if more people, more sports fans are going to spend more money more easily on gambling, my question to you is who loses? And the answer is the folks, the people, whether they're in St. Louis or otherwise. Somebody's got to lose if the house wins. And in this case, the problem, and I'm not opposed to it on a legal basis because it's free will, but the more you promote it, the house wins, somebody loses, and I'd like to know who that is.
Well, I think Nevada is still one of our 50 states, and they've been hustling a long time. Why
But
we
the
got
people
to
lose.
be the moral authority on gambling?
I'm not.
Look, I want to go to the ball game,
That's it.
and while I'm at the ball game,
Right.
I can have some money on the ball game.
Yeah.
People will do that.
The
People
problem is,
will.
Alvin, people end up betting their kids' milk money,
Well,
and that's a
and
fact.
okay,
And
and
if
people
you had a
end up-
rule, if you had a rule that said that, especially if you're on special assistance, food stamps, or government assistance, you should not be able to engage in sports.
Now,
betting.
that I disagree with that.
If you-
I disagree
Why?
with
Why?
discriminate.
Why?
Well,
And-
We're taking away their only remaining
only
pleasures.
fun. Right, yeah, it's only fun.
I don't think
Charlie,
we'll go back.
That's harsh.
people drink away the children's
Yeah,
lunch money.
right.
People do, spend money on new cars with the children's
Charlie.
lunch money. Let the people do what
at-
they want.
But at least a car
Be
will
a
get you from point A
libertarian.
to B, whereas Ray points out correctly, the house always wins.
Wait,
And
but
you
But
should
Charlie,
know that.
let me depart from you on the one point. I agree with you, and I think it is, like the lottery, for example, is a tax on the poor. Whether we want to admit it or not, that's what it ends up being. But when you start, if you're going to have free will, I depart from you on saying that if you receive public assistance, somehow there's some new rules that apply to you. I mean, frankly, a lot of people, when they hear what you're saying about the milk money, say, well, the kids can drink something other than milk.
You know where I first got that
Water
idea?
is good.
Water's
That's
good
what
for the
told
kids.
I
you.
first
They're
got
more
that
hydrated.
idea about
Kids-
the public assistance from Jack Buck's book, That's a Winner. In that autobiography, he says the house always wins and they should not allow people who are on public assistance into the boats
Well,
because it
but-
only makes
Did I
their
just steal
lives
another
Well,
one?
worse.
that's all right. That's all
Yeah.
fun. Now, how much is the zoo letting go by not charging? You got that figure in your head. How much is that a year? 10 million? All right, $19 billion a year nationally on illegal gambling. Now, if you aren't trying to get some of that money, you're foolish. That's just all there is to that.
That will be the
It's-
47th state.
Yeah,
doing it.
exactly. Right.
Alvin, maybe they could, I think one of the places you could gamble would be at the zoo.
I-
You could
I-
maybe bet on the animals.
How many cheetah cubs will there be?
There you go.
I know.
You can certainly bet on
I'm
you have a
surprised.
sports
How
book
many
at the zoo.
times have St. Louisans been sold that the lottery or gaming is really going to help us?
No,
and has it
what
really
I'm saying,
helped
no,
anybody?
no, it will
I mean, through these
generate.
years.
It will generate tax revenue.
And
now
that's-
you
that's
can
money-
argue about where
it's-
the money's going to go, but this is new money. This is money coming from states that.
No,
I'm
no
telling
one's
you-
coming here to bet,
Found
Alvin.
money.
They'll go to their own cities and towns just like we do with casino gaming.
Oh, you know
Charlie,
who will
wait a
be
minute.
slower than us? Arkansas, Kansas,
Hey, Arkansas
Oklahoma.
beat us on medical marijuana.
wait.
I would not bet on
Okay.
Missouri.
The-
By the way, Alvin, let me give you this. I agree with Alvin on this part. To the extent it becomes like the casinos, which are a zero-sum game, I've been arguing
Exactly.
but when it comes to the specific community for economic development and jobs in the specific place we're in, they're good. What I would caution
What?
you is,
Are you
no,
kidding me? Like
no.
East St. Louis and the city of St. Louis?
No,
now they
I'm
got
saying that the
casino
casinos
gaming?
are not, as a local engine of economic development, are not worthless. That's just not
And
fair.
high-end.
But what I'm trying to say to you is, don't act like if we become some mecca for that, if more St. Louisans spend more money for gambling, that it's going to help
Okay,
St.
gotta move
Louis
on.
in
Let's
general.
move on to the next topic. And we go to your newspaper, Sarah, because you're writing about the airport meeting. The Board of Estimate and Apportionment was supposed to approve a contract, actually with a Rex Singfield group, that would kind of look into and possibly choose a contractor who would privatize the airport. Some private firm would run Lambert Field in lieu of the governmental entities right now. Well, apparently, it hasn't worked out. What happened?
Yeah, I think Mayor Lyda Crewson thought she had a deal going into this meeting. They had had a meeting earlier that same day where representatives of all the people going to the E&A meeting, they were there, they hammered out a bunch of amendments. She wouldn't have taken it to the next agenda if she didn't think she had 2 of the 3 votes. She gets in there And Comptroller Darlene Green has always been opposed to it. And she had said that morning she was opposed. Well, Board President Reid comes in and he basically blows up the deal. And he doesn't say that he's flat out opposed forever, but he's asking for some concessions and saying that these amendments that they're doing, that he has questions about them. And the mayor's just kind of staring at him like, these are amendments you asked for. So I think she was completely blindsided by this move on his part. She seemed very frustrated after the meeting and told our reporter that she's not sure that this can go forward. She's not sure it's worth another attempt at this point.
So what happened with President Reid?
Well, my personal theory on this is I think he's hearing the same sort of blowback that a lot of, you can easily find online from more progressive St. Louis voters, and he's heading into a re-election campaign where he has two challengers who are to the left of him. He's got Jamila Nasheed, the state senator, and he's also got Megan Green, who's very far to the left, and they're both dead set against privatizing this thing, I'm sure, and that kind of puts some pressure on him to say, wait a minute, did you just give away our airport?
I don't think of it as a left-right issue. Maybe it is, but I think that privatizing the airport is a bad idea, and I think Darlene Green's right. So I have no theory as to why Lewis changed his mind if he did.
Oh, we could have investigated.
I think it would be best, the idea of supposedly hiring a consultant at no charge who's incentivized by coming back with the answer that you should privatize it because then they get paid is kind of ridiculous. And I think the idea of privatizing it, the benefits they're talking about in terms of economic development are real, but they could also be achieved without privatizing it. And that's my argument, is that they should look at it as
Alvin,
economic
This
development.
whole thing came to light when Mayor Slade was headed out the door. Nobody had anything to say about it. Rex Sinkfield. This is shakier than the Greitens prosecution. No, I'm with them. Just like, now, you know what? If we're going to do this, maybe we should proceed in a whole new round of talks. But this first go round should go nowhere. And Louis Reid changing his mind, flipping and flopping. Where's Louis Reid at? Oh, that's par for the course. So I don't think anybody should be surprised at that.
All right, well, that's it for this week's program. Stay tuned, however, because around the corner, we do have your turn. We do invite you to send some letters to us, care of KETC, 3655 Olive Street, St. Louis, Missouri. Our zip code is 63108, and you can send those emails, letters@ketc.org, and don't forget those tweets, #DonnybrookSTL, which I think Bill and Alvin are going to read in just a few moments on your turn. We want to thank Sarah Fenske for sitting in for Wendy Weiss. We sure appreciate that, Sarah. And we look forward to Wendy returning next week. Everybody, will see you next week, except Alvin and Bill will take your phone calls in just a moment, so don't touch that dial.
Donnybrook is made possible through the generous support of the members of KETC.